So Joe Biden has a new stupid plan, lazy stupid plan, in order to try to entice young people to come on board to Team Biden. What is this new lazy plan called? It is basically just an ad campaign. It's glitter and glitz. It's basically hope and change, but for a Joe Biden in more of a centrist, less interesting, far less imaginative politics. It's called League 46. League 46, because he will be the 46th president, apparently. Now, the catch here is, the first question, I think, if you were engaging this honestly, would be, why don't I get those voters? Why don't those voters trust me? Why did those voters go to Sanders to the tune of 70, 80%? Why am I losing this demographic? Look, like any honest appraisal of how you're going to get that particular group, that particular demographic, would start there. But that's an irrational system. In a rational system, that is where the candidate would start, especially if you're considering yourself part of a larger party. From that standpoint, that will be a rational standpoint. What do I need to do to get these voters? And you do what you need to do to get those voters. You create a coalition and you go through and you get in office and you implement those policies based on what your coalition, or you basically die trying. But that's not how our system works. Our system works in a race to the bottom. You have people who will fervently vote for somebody in order to keep somebody else out of office. Not an affirmative case, and will go for decades doing just that. This deadened expectation in regards to that political space where it's always a vote in order to hold the monsters at bay. It's never necessarily a vote to actually get something accomplished. Well, when Joe Biden is looking at the political space and he's trying to get these young voters, those young voters, their expectations haven't been deadened in the same way. They have things that they want. Even the African-American vote, if you look at the youth vote, Sanders was even getting that vote. I'm trying to make the point that even among the younger African-Americans, they're not wed to the Democratic Party in the way that their parents are or their grandparents are. So how is Joe Biden going to get these kids? How is he going to get these young voters? League 46. League 46 is an ad campaign. That ad campaign is basically going to have people who are young and who are professionals. So people like Simone Sanders or people who like Pete Buttigieg. And those young people are going to network in some kind of way. And they're going to meet people where they are. That's what League 46 is. There's nothing else to it. This is not an issue of policy. This is an issue of optics. How do we sell them this campaign in the same way that Obama sold something like Hope and Change? How do we get this group? It comes across as if they have just a fundamental disconnect in what motivates and what moves this demographic. Understand, Sanders is nearly an octogenarian and was able to get people who were 18, 19, 20, up to the age of 34. And not just get those people, have those people give money, hand over fists, and go out in weather and rattle and shake for their guy. And Biden is getting 3% in regards to cash. Basically nothing, a drop in a bucket. So the question becomes, why? Now, the problem is that Joe Biden doesn't really want to honestly engage this. The entire reason that this is just an ad campaign is because they don't want to give anything in order to get those people aboard. It was much more important for them to beat Sanders as opposed to beat Trump. But now that he's gotten past Sanders, they're like, all right, now we need to try to beat Trump. Again, beating Trump mattered less, but they still want to win if they can get the opportunity to win. But what's the problem with this, right? If you're a lefty, the only framing of an argument that you should take anytime somebody asks you anything about whether or not you're going to vote for Joe Biden, the framing of the argument should only be, if Donald Trump really is the apocalypse, if Donald Trump is going to end the world and democracy as we know it in this country, if that is indeed what is going to take place, how do you make an argument rationally that the Democratic Party should not accept concessions in order to beat a man who they're calling the apocalypse? As a rational human being, that does not make sense. If indeed you guys are actually accepting or attentive to the needs of your population. Meaning 88% of Democrats support that policy of Medicare for all. 70% of the population as a whole supports Medicare for all. That argument was being made going back for what, like a year? And it only got stronger. You're in the middle of a pandemic where 40 million people have lost their health insurance. 40 million people. You're going to have 800,000 people potentially sleeping on the streets. That's how bad this is. Because these people are still losing their jobs and you have people who are still losing their lives. And when Joe Biden is asked about will you support Medicare for all, Joe Biden, even right now, still says this.
Prepared now to say you're going to govern as a progressive and enact programs in the mold of Sanders and Warren? And if so, what does that say to either moderate Democrats or independents or even some Republicans dissatisfied with President Trump?
I'm prepared to say that I have a record of over 40 years and that I'm going to beat Joe Biden. Look at my record. The fact is that some areas that I think, for example, I think health care is a right, not a privilege. I do not support Medicare for all. I will not support Medicare for all, but I do.
I'm done. I can walk. Now, if you're telling me that you're trying to get a plan, that you're this 46 stuff, I'm going to tell you that is a lazy, stupid plan, and that if you really want to get the youth vote and the younger voters, then you would support Medicare for all because those kids want to be able to get health care, and they are in bad ends in regards to, from the standpoint of our system. Either loaded down with debt, not necessarily having a great job. I mean, many of the jobs that were created were low wage under Obama, 95% of those jobs. I guess I'm making the point, their situation in our society is not necessarily great. You have this kind of gig workforce, this vulnerable, perpetual insecurity. Many of these guys don't have $500 in the bank. The majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And Joe Biden, with a policy that gets 88% Democratic support, who still has not clinched the Democratic nomination, when asked about whether or not he would support a policy that gets 88% support, if that meant unifying the party in order to beat Donald Trump, a man who they're calling the apocalypse, Joe Biden still says, go fuck yourself. I say, okay. And I leave. And I invite everyone else to basically go with me. These youth voters should not vote for this nonsense. The only thing this will be a voter shaming campaign or some kind of campaign to promise stuff that they won't necessarily deliver. Joe Biden is a flagrant liar. He's proven this, a flagrant habitual liar. I've done multiple videos on this attesting to such, but just go back, look at his 80s campaign when he basically flamed out of the race for lying about civil rights, plagiarizing speeches, and lying about his education, his intellectual feats. They were not all that grand. I guess my point is, you would have to believe that a man who is a flagrant liar would actually do the policy, even if he did accept concessions. But on top of that, you need to make a rational argument to me why the Democratic Party, how they can justify not accepting Medicare for all and the expansion or elimination of student debt, again, something that has like 70% approval, if it meant unifying the party in an organic way. And if you can't support policies that have near unanimous support in the Democratic Party, then you shouldn't get the vote at all. I mean, understand what we're talking about. At this point, we're talking about something dealing with democracy itself. What is democracy if you have a situation where the majority of the people, nearly everybody in the party says, we want this. And the party itself says, we're not going to give you that. And the guy who's running for president of the party says, yeah, we're not going to give you that. Well, what does democracy look like when the majority of everybody in the party, the overwhelming majority, wants a policy, and the political instrument says, go fuck yourself to the people who want that policy? How is that democracy in any real means? We're able to see this now because we can see the polling on this, and we can see the level of support, and that level of support going up. We're in the middle of a crisis. And in normal circumstances, people who actually want to get things done, especially in the middle of a crisis, use that crisis to their ends. 40 million people have lost their health care. Joe Biden said if you wanted your health care from work, you can keep it. Not so much. Not so much. And as somebody who had a major illness with health care, it's not that great. I'm sorry. And the Democratic Party, the best they're going to give is COBRA payments. I'm making the point that you don't see anything wrong with this situation. This notion that because they have the boogeyman from the standpoint of Trump, that they believe that you should accept whatever they give you in regards to a Democrat, meaning standards don't matter, accountability doesn't matter. And is it possible that because no accountability has been in the process for so long, because all notions of standards have just been blown away, any random blue, Sam Cedar say he'll vote for a can of soup if it had a D on the side of it. Is it possible that because you've allowed all accountability to basically drain out of your political system by voting for any random blue, that this is the caliber of politician you end up with? You're not voting for him for what he's going to do. You're voting for him for who he's not. He knows his strengths. Now, at the point where people are like, hey, it's not rational for you to be willing to lose to Trump as opposed to accept these policy concessions in order to try to unify the party. But he doesn't function that way. In his head, we haven't never had to give these guys concessions. We've been able to basically run our politics in the way we run our politics. They vote for us because of who we are not. I'm least worse. And we can make the pragmatic argument that I'm least worse. But I'm making the point that he's not least worse. I'm making the point that over the context of time, this ineffective politician and voting for somebody like this basically ensures that you will never get what you want as a policy priority. This is this kind of soothing politician of sorts. But the reality of it is, this is the guy that prevents you from getting the actual policies that you want. The Republican Party is not going to pass it. And in the middle of a pandemic with 40 million people out of a job, Joe Biden looks at you and says, yeah, I'm not for that policy that has 88% support, nearly unanimous support. But yeah, we're going to have to figure out a way to get the kids. But yeah, I'm not for universal elimination of student debt. But yeah, we're going to have to find a way to get the kids. Yeah, I'm not really for that Green New Deal stuff. But yeah, we're going to find a way to get the kids. My point is, it's not magic. Sanders wasn't pulling flowers out of a hat. Sanders basically would stand on stage and spend an hour just talking about policy that he wanted to get accomplished and how he was going to try to get it accomplished. If you say things and they believe you as a credible actor, and right there, you failed that test right off the bat. But if they believe you as a credible actor pushing policies that will materially benefit them and their interests, they would back you. There's no magic to that. There's not a magic door. Yes, you can try to scam them, but like you say, you have a history of 40 years. It's pretty difficult to kind of escape that history over the last 40 years. And the youth vote is the vote that is more able to basically go back and look at the things that you've said in your past, which is probably why they don't like you very much. I guess I'm making the very basic point that getting that vote is not magic. You may be able to con them and trick them with these kind of gimmicky campaign ads. You're going to have Sanders working in your steed to try to, again, con those people back into the party. You're going to have Axelrod, or not Axelrod, Sanders' campaign guy. You're going to have him basically, not campaign, Jeff Weaver. Yeah, Weaver is going to be running a super PAC, and again, to con lefties into basically backing Joe Biden. Joe Biden offers nothing. He offers nothing. And all of these people, as opposed to using this crisis in order to get real tangible things accomplished, even if it's just one fucking big thing, like Medicare for all, none of them have the balls to basically, and every time somebody asks a question about it, to say, if Donald Trump is the apocalypse, how does the Democratic Party justify not accepting Medicare for all, something that has 88% support in the middle of a pandemic where 40 million people are losing their health care? How do they justify not accepting that in order to unify the party organically if it means beating a man who they say is the apocalypse? That's the only framing you should ever take for that argument, because that framing is the one that's true. That's the one that's more right. Either you have a democratic system or not. And if you don't have a democratic system, well, why should I participate in something that's just fraud? If it is a democratic system, then there should be some tether from the standpoint of what the public wants, especially when the public wants something so fervently, and what the political device provides. Even if it's the party credibly pushing for that particular policy, we don't even have that, which is kind of my point, that politics is fundamentally broken in the way that we've encountered politics. I mean, you have something where the public says, we want this, and the political instrument just says no, and have every expectation that you're still going to go out and vote for them, because they have you in a situation where you're so terrified of the monsters in the other party. That's an astonishing position to be in, where you are basically cowed by your political parties. They're your saviors. not there to actually do anything. And because you're willing to back Democrats who don't back your policies, well, the Republican damn sure is not going to back it. Meaning what you want as a policy priority is just fundamentally and forever off the table because you're always stuck in that quagmire of you have nowhere else to go. That needs to be confronted. I mean, the fact that that Chinese finger trap existed in the first place gets across that there's a certain momentum or a certain incentive to keep that the way that is, but that needs to be challenged directly. I'm sorry, Joe Biden is not least worse. If you have a situation where Joe Biden is basically preventing actual things from taking place and is basically sopping up a vote tally of people who actually want those policies accomplished, but is the guy that prevents that stuff from happening. Meaning every time you put in a spineless Democrat, people who actually want real change and real things to take place basically get sandbagged by people like this, arguing this radical pragmatism of least worse. The problem is, over the course of time, they're not least worse. I mean, you can look at Joe Biden's tax policy. Joe Biden wants to take the tax rate, I think it was like 28%. Well, it was 31% under Obama. Meaning, over the course of time between, let's say, one political cycle of a Democrat, Republican, Democrat, you've now had the tax rate to get less over time, which is kind of my point. Election after election after election. Elections have to be viewed over the context of time, not over these kind of narrow windows of just this one instant in time, because that's not really true. Especially if you want policy accomplished, there's a certain momentum in regards to the way your politics is going. If you have a situation where the tax rate is going down, then that tax rate is going towards the right. Well, Joe Biden is going to give you that. If you're telling me that the world is at stake because of climate change, and this guy is like not having any kind of ambitious policy to deal with that, well, that's illogical to me. That's just as bad as Donald Trump saying he doesn't believe in science. I mean, I hope you understand what I mean by this. The challenges that we're supposedly presented with are in no way dealt with by Biden. And by backing Biden and supporting Biden fervently in order to get him over the finish line from the standpoint of Donald Trump, you give away all leverage to try to get anything accomplished. And again, you are in the middle of a pandemic with 40 million people that have lost their jobs and 40 million people that are going to lose their health care. And you still can't get Medicare for all over the finish line. If you can't get it over the finish line now with 88% support, you're never going to get it. Which goes back to the basic point that if you're not going to have a political instrument that's attuned to your interests, why are you going to support that instrument? And in this very specific case where they are arguing to you that for whatever reason, Donald Trump is going to end the world, but it is better for Donald Trump to end the world than to accept a policy that has 88% support. That is so fucking bizarre, which is the reason why that question should be asked at every waking moment in front of every camera that every lefty can get their face on. That is the question to ask. That is the issue, right? If we do have a political process, how on earth are you ignoring that policy? I have a super chat. Trudy, I didn't forget you. Very interesting topic. FNCNBC, that's right. Hi, JT, and all of everyone else. I imagine that's where that was going to go. All right, I'm going to end this because this one has gone longer than I anticipated. But like, share, and subscribe.